You may have heard that the United States reached its debt ceiling on January 19th. But what exactly does that mean? What happens now? And why are politicians periodically arguing over this thing we call the debt ceiling? I am going to answer all of those questions and more. So if that sounds interesting to you, then keep on watching. So what is the debt ceiling? The United States government for many years now basically always spends more money than it takes in from taxes, and I mean a lot more, resulting in our government always functioning at a deficit. For almost all of the past 100 years, the United States has functioned in a deficit, and since the year 2001, the government has run a deficit averaging about $1 trillion every single year. In order to function, the US government has to spend money on things like Social Security and Medicare payments, military equipment, highway maintenance, building construction, research and education, and the list goes on and on. Now, in order to pay our bills so that the government doesn't stop functioning, the US takes on debt, and that is how we are able to keep everything running. Way back in the olden days, Congress, on a case-by-case basis, authorized the government as needed to take on debt in order to pay our bills. But this started to become a very time-consuming and laborious process for Congress, especially when World War I happened and the government was spending an extraordinary amount of money. And as such, in 1917, Congress created the debt ceiling, sometimes called the debt limit. This sets the maximum amount of outstanding federal debt the US government can incur. So rather than Congress constantly needing to approve new debt, they just created a somewhat arbitrary limit, allowing the government to borrow money until that threshold is hit, at which point Congress has to agree to raise the debt ceiling to keep the government functioning. If the United States hits the debt ceiling and Congress does not raise it, this would result in the US government being unable to pay its bills, causing essentially a worldwide economic crisis. This would be a crisis worse than what happened in 2008. Most experts say it would be something more akin to the Great Depression in terms of the economic fallout. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, didn't we already hit the debt ceiling over a week ago? Why hasn't the world fallen apart yet? You are correct. We did hit the debt ceiling on January 19th. However, the Treasury Department has been able to keep paying our bills through what's known as extraordinary measures. It's really complicated, but basically it's just accounting tricks. They're able to shuffle money around to different accounts, borrow from Social Security, things like that, in order to keep us paying our bills, which that is so ghetto when you really think about it. The richest country on the planet is using accounting tricks to pay the bills. What? Anyway, these extraordinary measures are not a permanent solution, and the money will eventually dry up around mid-June, at which time if Congress does not raise the debt ceiling, then the United States will actually be unable to pay its bills, which is called a default. So when economists and other experts talk about the chaos that would ensue if the US hits the debt ceiling, what they are actually talking about is what would happen if the US defaulted on its debt. So why are politicians always arguing over the debt ceiling? To answer that question, first, you need a little bit of context, and I want to make one thing clear that I think gets lost in this whole discussion. Raising the debt ceiling does not authorize any new government spending. All it does is authorize the government to pay its bills and debts that we have already incurred. This money is already spent. Roads and buildings have been built, federal programs and contracts are underway. Now we just need to pay the bill. So it's not about any new spending. And you can debate either way whether or not the federal deficit is a problem. That's not what this video is about, so I'm not really going to get into my personal thoughts on the deficit. I've seen arguments that are fairly persuasive in both directions. I've heard some economists say you need to look at the deficit in comparison to the size of the economy, and that given COVID and everything that's happened in the past few years, an $88 billion deficit is really not that big of a deal. And I've heard some economists say our current deficit is not sustainable and we either need to lower spending or increase taxes to make a more sustainable budget. But regardless, what I don't think really is an opinion is that the debt ceiling is not the proper way to go about reducing our deficit and changing the budget. If Republicans want to do that, then they have to negotiate that through the legislative process each year. And just for a little bit of perspective, Republicans raised the debt ceiling 3 times under President Trump without a peep. So that should be some pretty compelling evidence for the fact that this whole debt ceiling argument is really just some partisan bull. But getting back to the original question, why are politicians always arguing over the debt ceiling? Well, it's because politics have become very polarized. Shocker, I know. And Republicans have not been successful over the years in negotiating the types of spending cuts they want. because the things they want to do in order to cut spending, like eliminate Social Security and Medicare, for example, are not very popular ideas with the American people. But that's a whole nother discussion. But so they have resorted to using the debt ceiling as a hostage in order to force Democrats to negotiate spending cuts with them. At the heart of it, that really is what's going on here. It's taking something that should just be a procedural formality, raising the debt ceiling, and weaponizing it to strong arm their political desires. And we saw this for the first time in 2011 when Barack Obama was president. Democrats controlled the Senate and Republicans controlled the House of Representatives. Republicans refused to raise the debt ceiling without Democrats agreeing to spending cuts, and the argument went right up until the 11th hour and actually had some pretty bad consequences. Even though the US didn't default on our debt at that time, we got so close to the brink that the United States as a country had its credit rating downgraded from a AAA to a AA. Like, how embarrassing. And the stock market crashed for about 6 months. Interest rates went up. It was not great. And that was only because we got so close to defaulting on our debt. Now imagine if the United States government actually defaulted on our debt. It would be an economic catastrophe. In addition to the economic consequences, in order to raise the debt ceiling in 2011, Democrats agreed to some really big spending cuts that ended up being very bad for the American people. And it also taught Republicans that, like, ooh, this is a good strategy. We should continue to use the debt ceiling and threaten to blow up the world economy as a way to get what we want. So after 2011, Obama was like, F this bull. We are never doing this again. We are never negotiating over the debt ceiling again. And in 2013, Republicans tried again to use the debt ceiling as a way to negotiate spending cuts. And Obama was like, nope, not doing it. If you call me, I'm not calling you back. If you schedule a meeting about it, I'm not showing up. If you email me, I'm deleting it. I am ignoring you. Don't try me. He called their bluff. He was like, do it. Blow up the economy. I dare you bitches. And ultimately, he won. Republicans raised the debt ceiling and Democrats didn't have to agree to any spending cuts. And I just have to say, what strong leadership. Obama was really a once-in-a-lifetime true leader, and this is just one example of his strong leadership skills. But anyways, since that time, the 2011 and 2013 debt ceiling fights, Democrats have not negotiated at all with Republicans over raising the debt ceiling, and that continues to be the strategy for Democratic leadership. They say we are not negotiating over the debt ceiling. The problem is now it's 2023, and the Republican Party has become so much more extreme than it was even in 2011. And I'm not so sure that this current Republican Party wouldn't be willing to literally eviscerate the world economy and plunge us into perhaps the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression over not getting their way. We just saw all the drama with Kevin McCarthy and the Speaker of the House vote, where about 20 far-right Republicans held the government hostage for a week. So this dynamic is definitely going to keep playing out in regards to the debt ceiling fight. And pretty much all Republicans, even so-called moderate Republicans like Don Bacon from Nebraska, for example, have publicly said they are not going to vote for a clean debt ceiling increase without Democrats negotiating spending cuts. So this debt ceiling fight is really posed to be probably the most dramatic we've ever seen in history. I hope this video helped you to understand a little bit about the debt ceiling and why politicians are arguing about it. I'm probably going to make another video about this topic with updates as we get closer to June and Congress either must act or let the government default on its debt. So definitely subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future content I have planned. Catch you in the next one, and as always, stay happy, healthy, and informed. Bye-bye.